Good evening, Nigeria. Welcome to this special Democracy Day edition of the Political Advantage platform, the PAP Show, sponsored by the Nigeria Youth Futures Fund, which is NYFF. It is an initiative committed to equip, to empower and support young change leaders from across Nigeria with the requisite skills, with the knowledge and resources to enable them to become self-leaders who will lend their voice towards national development issues. Of course, we've been hearing leaders of tomorrow. So NYFF is there to equip them to be those leaders and also drive sustainable social change. So now let's talk about June 12. Does that ring a bell? If it doesn't, well, it is a date etched in the hearts of every Nigerian who believes in democracy, who believes in justice, and the power of the people's voice. Let me tell you a very short story. 32 years ago, on June 12, 1993, Nigerians went to the polls in what many still consider the freest and fairest election in our nation's history. That election, though it was annulled, but it actually became a symbol of our democratic aspirations and the catalyst for the democracy we are enjoying today. Tonight, we're not just looking back, we are looking forward. Remember that adage that says, forward ever, backward never? Well, that is what we're doing today. We're looking forward. So we are trying to amplify the voices of young Nigerians who are reimagining. We have so much imagination in the minds of the youth. So we're trying to reimagine our democratic future. So wondering if we have a theme? Well, yes, we do. Our theme is Voices for Democracy, Shaping the Nigeria We Want. That is our theme. So stay with us to find out what we have for you today. Welcome back to this special Democracy Day edition of the PAP Show, sponsored by the Nigeria Youth Futures Fund, NYYF. My name is Khadija Ahmad Rufai, and I'm going to be your host tonight. Well, joining me here, I'm not the only person here. We're talking about democracy, so I need as much people as possible. So here I have three dynamic voices representing the energy and the vision of Nigeria's youth. Yes, the youth. Leaders of tomorrow. First of all, we have Onyechi Elizabeth Agbiti Douglas. I hope I did not murder that name. Forgive me if I did. She's actually the project director for the Nigeria Youth Futures Fund, where she is driving for positive social change and development. And she's a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Administration. Elizabeth, do you know what she brings? She brings a wealth. I'm talking about wealth of experience, of knowledge and skills in communications and project management in Nigeria's international development and humanitarian space. Elizabeth also holds a PhD with a specialization in development communication from Babcock University. Now, I feel like clapping for Elizabeth, seriously. And now we have Mukhtar Mujahid also. And Mukhtar Mujahid, you're also welcome. He is a financial and geopolitical strategist, and he holds a core in financial accounting and business analytics from Harvard Business School. And he is an expert in financial strategy, international finance, financial technology, and corporate valuation. And we are certain, definitely, that he will bring an economic perspective to our democratic discourse tonight. They're not the only guests. We have a third person right here with me, and he is Akan Edit Etienam. I hope I did not murder your name once again. Okay, and he represents Akwa Ibom South Senatorial District in the 6th Nigerian Youth Parliament. He's an aide to the Deputy Governor of Akwa Ibom State, and he's also a public policy and governance analyst who is committed to promoting youth leadership and the welfare of vulnerable workers through policy and grassroots initiatives. Guess what Akan is? He is a member of the Imaginative Futures Working Group of the Nigerian Youth Future Fund. That is NYFF. Sorry. Okay, now that we all know our guests, I think it is time that we start. And we are supposed to start, or I'm going to say we are starting with the foundation of June 12. I mentioned June 12. It is etched in the hearts of many Nigerians, though not all. So, Elizabeth, I will start with you. I'm not trying to be biased, starting with the woman. Meanwhile, we have men. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. But I'm going to start with Elizabeth. Elizabeth, for many young Nigerians that are born after 1993, June 12th might just be another public holiday. Yeah, it's just a public holiday and nothing more. So how do we make this history relevant to a generation that did not live through it?
Very important, very valid question to ask.
Yeah.
I think the best response I can give to this is, in order for you to understand the now, and for you to have a sense of what can be, or even to be able to imagine what today can be like, what the future can look like, it's important for you to revisit the past.
Exactly.
Right. So, it's not just with June 12th, but even things like the Civil War, the 80s, the military rule, for a lot of, in fact, for majority of Nigerians today, all of these things are stuff that we just make reference to. It's past history.
Exactly.
However, what I will tell our young people today is that June 12th is not just something that happened way before your time. It's also part of the history of youth activism, the involvement of young people in Nigeria's history. For instance, NANS. Many of us are still familiar with the National Association of Students. They played a major role in mobilizing the grassroots in voting during that period. A lot of young people that time were first-time voters.
Okay.
So, this is us talking about the history. And then when eventually the elections were cancelled, a lot of young people, journalists, even just regular citizens, were part of those who drove the protests. So, if we look at it and fast forward to something like the NSAS movement, the Occupy Nigeria movement, you find that there's a similar trend. So what I would say to every young Nigerian is that it may be hard to see the connection, but ultimately June 12th is part of the Nigerian story. It's part of the story for anyone who cares about democracy. So yes, we celebrate June 12th, but June 12th is a symbol of really what young people can do. And I can't help but also make a point of stressing the fact that MKO Abiola, who was the presidential candidate at the time, wasn't a young person. He was actually in his mid to late 50s. But again, that's a testament to what happens when young Nigerians get behind, believe in a particular candidate. I think we saw something similar with the Obedient movement, and how that's been going. You have a group of probably our most active, robust, section of the population, and that enthusiasm and the energy. And I think for our young people now, it's important that we tap into those lessons.
So are we supposed to sit them down and just tell them all this history and the relevance it has, just to make them understand how impactful it was?
You are precisely right about that. So I think as Nigerians, we do need to not forget some of the most important ways that we pass on our history. So, fun fact, we are not a script culture. We don't record, we've typically not recorded our history a lot by writing, but we do a lot of storytelling. And I think it's actually an indictment on our older generations that our younger, the present crop of young people cannot relate to the stories of June 12th. Because what it means is that between our school system and between just how we talk and relate with ourselves at home, there's a lot about our history that is getting lost by us not having these conversations.
Wow. And talking about getting lost, that will bring me back to Akan. I think Akan is actually a Gen Z, I guess. There's this beef between Gen Zs and millennials, something like that. Gen Zs feel no, we are better, millennials feel no. You cannot even compare. So Akan, now, as someone who represents this generation that inherited this democracy, what does June 12th mean to you personally?
I think I would put June 12 as what I was told when I was growing up. So growing up, I always had fascination to know the country's history. So my personal experience with June 12 was a story of violence, unfortunately, because an election was annulled and people ran away. People had to leave the country to advocate for a better country. A lot of people who were in the country had to take risks. So that was my own personal experience with June 12.
Okay.
But to relate it to what is happening in today's society, well, the story of June 12 has taught us lessons, has taught me personally a lesson, because I think I am able to understand that there are certain mistakes, I'll use the word mistakes, that happened within the course of June 12 that I believe that my generation should not seek to do, should not seek to make the same mistakes also. So that's my own personal story.
Okay. Which brings us back to what Elizabeth said, that, mentioning the stories to our younger generation and telling them the impact actually, will go a long way. So when you hear the word democracy now, what actually comes to your mind in the Nigerian context? Democracy.
Well, in the Nigerian context, democracy to me is a system of government that we are still grappling with. So democracy is not perfect in Nigeria. It may not be perfect within the next 20 years because it's a process. Democracy thrives where there are stronger institutions. So when there are errors, it's just that the institutions are able to checkmate and make the system, the democracy itself, stronger. So Nigeria as democracy in Nigeria today is a system that is still trying to find its way. Because we still have fundamental issues where, like, we have weak institutions, basically. Then we have the fact that these weak institutions have led to lack of accountability. Have also led to the fact that there's a lack of accountability, and then that now leads to endemic corruption. That's the kind of democracy that we find ourselves in now. So that is how I just basically.
So it's actually not the government of the people, by the people, and for the people.
It's a system. So
unfortunately.
We do need to work hard to get it better. So there are things we need to do.
All right. So I think it's time we move to our economic analyst. Mukhtar, from an economic and geopolitical perspective, looking at what was truly at stake in that 1993 election, would you say Nigeria has made the desired progress since our return to democracy in 1999? Is there any progress at all?
Thank you very much, Khadija. When we're talking about democracy, are we talking about democracy as a system of governance, or democracy as a system of institutions?
Both.
Both, okay. As he mentioned, and as she mentioned, as you mentioned as well, you just spoke about how it's forward ever, backward never, right? And you discussed why it's important for us to take a look at the past. You can't, sometimes the only way forward is by taking a step backward. And you can't know where you're going to if you don't know where you're coming from. Now, when we talk about June 12, 1993, it's as if something ever worked before 1993. It never worked. And it will never work. This is just the simple truth. The first election, 1959, that Nigeria had was chaotic. The second election, 1964, was much more chaotic. In fact, parties boycotted that election. And in certain parts of the country, the elections had to be held again in 1965. What I'm saying in essence is, and in fact, between the election of 1950, 59 and 1964, we had two census to ascertain Nigeria's population. Because one part of the country hacked their population, the other part said, "Oh no, we don't agree with it." Then all of a sudden,
and then it became all chaotic.
It's a cycle of clown. And now the fundamental problem is the system. The system was never designed to work. Why? Because this is not a system that we created to factor our own social realities. This is just the truth. This was the system that was passed on to us by a system that was extracting from us. So what really changed between 1959 to 2025? Last election, a lot of people were upset because the election was declared at 4 a.m. What changed? What I'm saying in essence is the actual reality is the entire system itself has to look at our critical realities. And systems bring checks and balances. We are innately selfish and socially cognitive. That's how we are as human beings. I mean, the general problem here is look, we all need to understand, as Nigeria, we are in a boot of a car, a trunk of a car. We don't know where the car is going to. We don't know who's driving the car. We don't even know what type of car we're in. All we know is when there is a gallop, when we fall into a bump, a speed bump, we are in the boot and we're bouncing. This is our reality today. And we cannot run away from this reality. Now, I will tell you why system is important. Now, countries have established their systems to advance their own path towards development. And there is no such thing as enforcement of system on others. Now, when someone enforces his or her system on you, you have to ask yourself, for whose benefit? Now, let me give you...
Who enforced the system on us? What are you talking about?
The current system that we are looking at is called the liberal... This is liberal democracy. I mean, liberal democracy is not the only form of democracy that exists in the world. Now, let me give you a simple example. China. China is a socialist democracy. Why? Because people are allowed to vote. But the only difference is you cannot just come from nowhere and decide you want to run for governor in China or you want to run for president in China. It doesn't work like that. In China, for you to run for a political office, for everybody to run for a political office, the only seat available for everybody are the local council elections. Now, the best local council, the best local councillor would be selected as the local government chairman. The best local government chairman would be selected as the mayor. And then the best mayors would have like a committee of 7. And then from this committee of 7, they choose who becomes. So that means over time, you have already been tested. It's your merit that takes you to leadership. Right now, what we have is capital ruling.
So you think our own system is like wrong to just have everybody, can come out to just, vote and be voted for? You think?
That just doesn't make sense. You know why that doesn't make sense? Because governance is not something that you just stumble upon overnight. Because we're dealing with the lives of people. We're dealing with the future of people. Now, let me just tell you two things. Now, the first one is there is a joke that the best form of democracy is America's democracy, if you can afford it. I mean, it's about money. It's about money. Now, there is a fundamental problem with the system itself, and that system would have to be fixed. I think this is where I stop for now.
Okay, yeah. Maybe we'll come back to how we can fix it much later, yeah? Okay, so now let's go back to Elizabeth. Do you think cancelling, that election in 1993 had a negative impact, like on Nigeria's democracy and also caused maybe division among Nigerians?
So in responding to that question, I'm going to piggyback off of what Mukhtar has said.
Okay.
And I think that's also an important point for us to take note of. So we're talking about June 12 and what it meant for us. But some of us will also remember that before June 12, we had May 29 as our democracy day. So again, there was a rationale for May 29 because we've had 2 instances where, we returned from military rule to democracy. In answering your question, what I guess I'm trying to say is June 12 wouldn't have helped. The annulment of the elections wouldn't have helped. But again, remember, as Mukhtar said, we already had a pattern, a system where there was already very little trust, where the way we were already doing governance, was fraught with many issues, right? I smiled when he took us back, even as far back as 1969, 64, the things that led up to the first coups, the first coup and then the civil war that we had. And, it's essentially that our, the way we've done governance, broadly, and then by the time we now zone into democracy, has always been fraught and with problems. It's always been very problematic. And so what happened in June 12, 1993, was symptomatic, was a further expression of that, right? For many Nigerians, that generation said, look, that election they believe was the freest and the fairest. So I think maybe that's why June 12 is so symbolic. As a collective, most Nigerians were like, the results that came out from here, we felt actually, for the most part, reflected what we were expecting. There were very few arguments across us as Nigerians on ethnic or religious lines, right? And then having that annulled, irrespective of what justifications, we think there might have been for that. Because I know for former president, the former head of state, has come out with a book trying to, clarify and explain his own side of the story, his version of history. Irrespective of how noble those justifications may have been, they didn't help. They further contributed to a perception and a sense of being Nigerian, which meant that our opinions, our thoughts, our desires as a people were never really going to count. And that a small group of individuals can sit somewhere and make decisions on behalf of the rest of us. So what happened in June 12 wouldn't have helped us in any respect, truthfully.
Okay, so in essence, it actually had a negative impact.
Yes.
Okay, so do you think it actually caused division among Nigerians also?
No.
Okay.
And again, I will do that. I will leverage again on
Okay.
the history that we had. I remember during the course of doing a bit of digging into our nation's history and the role, journalism played in that, discovering that, tribalism, religious sentiments, Mukhtar made reference to the census and this debates that we've been having. So, there are some things we hear now, and we don't realize that the roots of these things are decades old. This whole conversation about what the real population of the North versus the South is almost a century old. It's a very old conversation. So Nigeria, even before our independence, there was already that distrust.
Division.
The divisions were already there. The fault lines were already there. And unfortunately, we came together or we elected to continue the construction that the British had come up with. We accepted those boundaries and we've tried to make a go of it. But the divisions aren't new. They've generally almost always, they've always been there. We've always distrusted ourselves.
Okay.
And I'll say it again. What happened in June 12, where despite those differences, majority of Nigerians agreed on the outcome, was a miracle. And then to now have that annulled, would caused further deepened, those didn't give us the fighting chance that maybe we would have had to surpass or get past those sort of differences.
Mukhtar, do you agree with her?
I do agree to a certain extent.
Okay.
So there is a difference between agreeing to a certain extent and disagreeing. I don't disagree with her, but neither do I agree with her.
Okay, so
and the reason is simple. Now, when we talk about annulling election, it's as if if the election is free. Okay, so let's go back. Let's just hypothetically speaking, right? Let's assume the election was free and fair. So
okay.
So what would happen? Nigeria would overnight be fixed. 2015 election was free and fair. What came afterwards? Disaster. Nigeria was basically a whole new direction. The entire building is crumbling. But we're in the building arguing, how to arrange furniture, or this POP design is better. When the entire building is crumbling, governance is protection of lives and properties. It's just for better quality of life for its citizens. That's all. There is no freedom with democracy. If there is freedom, please, at 2 a.m., drive to Zamfara. If there is freedom, there is no such thing as freedom. Nigeria cannot exist in autarky. So now, Nigeria cannot exist in isolation. Why can't Nigeria exist in isolation? Because the world is too globalized. But globalization of this world extends beyond economic globalization. The initial form of globalization was colonialism. Imperial powers had to create a system of governance that stretched all throughout the world. And now this system was meant to provide what? Provide stability in what? In extraction. And for it to happen, it had to establish a system of governance in every part of the world that it was extracting from. And that is the genesis, the basis, the foundation of our existence. We all need to look back, even prior to 1959 that I mentioned earlier. We are a collection of civilizations. In fact, Nigeria is a collection of 4 main civilizations. The first civilization to the northeastern part of the country is the Kanuri civilization, right? And then to the northwestern part of the country, you had the House of Fulani, the Sokoto Caliphate and whatnot. And then we had the Oyo Empire and we had the Bini Empire. Right? So this civilization, amalgamation of this civilization is what really formed Nigeria. And these civilizations all had a different system of governance that was working for them.
Yeah.
Now, let me give you a simple example with the Benin Empire. The Benin Empire was so sophisticated that for hundreds of years, Benin had street lights, like lanterns with oil. Their roads were perfectly straight roads. The artwork was something else. When the British first came, they were like, no, this can't be done by Africans. Yeah. Okay, and now you have the Northwestern civilization. That's the House of Fulani civilization. House of Fulani civilization has existed for over 1,000 years with its mind and entire economy channeled towards the Sahel. Now you talk about the Kanuri Empire. The Kanuri Empire was also built with an economy that channeled towards the Sahel. Now, when you talk about the Oyo Empire, the empire itself created checks and balances. Let me give you a simple example. The Oyo Empire, they were kingmakers. So the king did not have automatic powers, like all unchecked powers. Yeah. Okay? That is power checking itself. Now, this is a system of governance. Now, when you talk about the economic system, Nigeria had a whole different economic system that's working. And if we're talking about economics does not exist in isolation. Economics is the reality of you and I, our social realities. Now, let me give you a simple example with the economic model that has been working and that still works in this part of the world. The Igbo economic system, the economic system of apprenticeship. Look, after the Civil War, the Igbos lost everything. But as I speak to you today, they are still they were able to make a comeback and still become one of economically strong. And in fact, I can argue that they're economically stronger than Northern Nigeria. If Northern Nigeria had the same apprenticeship program, we wouldn't be talking about this. So what I'm saying in essence is there are economic models that we can all see. I'm not saying that we should all look at these economic models and adopt them. No. The whole idea for both the economic and the political models that we have, not just in Nigeria or across Africa or all over the world, is for us to look at our economic and social realities, and then be like, okay, now what can we pick from here and there to come up with our own system? And that's the only solution.
Wow. Okay, now let's come back to Mr. Akan here as a representative in the Nigerian Youth Parliament. How has this experience shaped your understanding of democratic representation?
My experience in what context?
Okay, so what lessons? Okay, let me say what lessons from the Youth Parliament model could be applied to make Nigeria's formal democratic institutions more responsive to young people's needs and aspirations?
Okay, we are I don't like to use the word part-time. We're slightly non-partisan, but we are also it's a training ground. So basically what you do is you tend to shadow legislators. So you get to understand the systems, you get to understand lawmaking in its core form. So what that does is it gives you the ability to understand. I like to use the word lobbying because I think to me a larger percentage of lawmaking is lobbying. You tend to negotiate. Unfortunately, you have to negotiate with your fellow colleagues to get the right things done or the right things in your own context done. So what we are learning, I think we were inaugurated in February, so I think we've had one sitting, so we're just starting. But what we are learning, what I believe the last 5 sessions before us have learned is that there are very unique ways again, I use the word unfortunately, very unique Nigerian ways to get things done that might not necessarily, in the context of the examples he has used, might not necessarily be the best ways to get things done. So I'll give you an example. I think the Not Too Young to Run bill was initiated by the Nigerian Youth Parliament, I think the 4th session. So, but the actual bill itself that came out from the 4th session was not what was eventually passed in terms of age gaps, age limits, and term limits, and things like that. So now, it was idealistic when they proposed it. But when it got to the actual National Assembly and then the processes, the checks and balances, the lobbying came in and those things went away. So it has also made me to understand the limitations of the Nigerian Youth Parliament. The Nigerian Youth Parliament really recommend. So as much as you're learning, you are just learning to recommend. You really can't push that much. So you could recommend as much, you could recommend 10 bills, you could recommend 10 policy, this thing, and you might never get one pushed in. So, but what's the good part about it also is the hands-on experience. You tend to get political mileage. So I know their colleagues, one of the pioneer speaker of the Youth Parliament, he's from Akwa Ibom. I'm from Akwa Ibom. So he moved from the Nigerian Youth Parliament. He moved back to the States to be State House member. He became the youngest speaker of the State House of Assembly. Then he went to the House of Reps. I think he contested as governor 2023. He lost at the primaries. So, but he's now private citizen. But again, it was a breeding ground for him. Then the other experiences where there are people who moved from the youth parliament to various sides of the country, geopolitical zones, they attempted to run for offices. Some of them failed, some of them did not. There are also examples of those who left the youth parliament to work in government. So they became special assistants, some became commissioners, some went to head like actual areas of government that should effect change.
Okay, all right. The next question is for all three of you, but I'll still start with Elizabeth, not being biased once again. Which heroes of democracy can we look up to, and like what lessons can we learn from them? But let's not talk about Balewa, Sardona. Let's look at the people that are in politics right now, people that are making real change that we can look up to, and the lessons we can learn from them.
Wow, that's I mean, that's a really deep question.
Okay.
So, interestingly enough, does the person have to be Nigerian, or can I go anywhere across the globe?
Well, I think let's talk Nigerians first.
Let's talk Nigerians first. So, I think one of the people I look at, and I think certainly represents and is someone that we can learn from, is the former governor of Anambra State and presidential candidate Peter Obi.
Okay.
This was someone who, in his own state, the time he was there, was a great example. Till today, you still hear people of the state, praising, lauding his achievements, particularly when it came to financial management, prudent use of public funds. He ran, for office, aspired to be president. Whatever anybody wants to say about the 2023 elections, he's not our sitting president. But if you continue to follow him on, you will find that he's still acting in ways that contribute meaningfully, effectively to discourse on policy issues, where things are happening, citizens are affected by disasters and so on. You find that, he makes a point of being present and showing up. And for me, I certainly think, and I always tell everybody, we need to remember, while the goal for those of us who want to get into politics is to win, the reason you want to win is because you want to be able to create impact. You want to be able to generate results and bring about meaningful change. And so what I'll tell people is that it's not just what happens when you win, it's also what happens when you don't win, that reveals. So Peter Obi is one. Then I will get a bit controversial, and I would make reference to the senator from Kogi Central. Kogi Central. Yes. Senator Natasha Akpoti-Uduaghan. Again, if you've been following her story, and I understand that, that's why I said it's a bit controversial. For women in politics in Nigeria, there's this quote now that goes around, good girls don't get the corner office. For her to become senator was an epic story in and of itself. And then we now come today to the whole issue of her place, her experience in the upper chambers of National Assembly. Whatever anybody feels, oh, he said, she said, we don't know the truth of what happened. The truth of it is, and again, there are studies that show all of this. Research on women's experience in politics that resonates, and even outside of politics, that resonate very strongly with some of the concerns she's raised about, for instance, the point about strength of institutions versus individuals, and what it means to be a woman in politics, or a woman in Nigeria, generally. And the fact that under what the rest of us would, I certainly would consider very difficult circumstances, whether we agree or not, she's not afraid to use her voice. She's not afraid to rock the boat. And sometimes that's necessary. Change can be uncomfortable. Confronting issues can be uncomfortable.
Okay, so that's what we should learn from her.
So I think that's yes, we do. For young people, for anybody who does want to be able to bring about change, particularly if you belong to a group that is typically marginalized, you do need to. You can't keep playing to the status quo. You can't keep trying to prove you are a good person. You do need to be willing, when there's injustice, to step out and take that risk that you are going to be misunderstood, and that some people will just not get it.
Okay. All right, let's go back to Mukhtar. Mukhtar.
I'm glad that you asked that question, and I'm glad
we can look up to.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that question, but I'm much more happier with the response. The first response is it all went quiet, because we had to struggle to think about people that we can look up to. I'm very pragmatic, and in the space of geopolitics, I would consider myself a pragmatist and a realist. Okay, so I deal with realities, I deal with facts. Now, first of all, I really don't see, if we're going to talk about, within the political space, who would I look up to? Who would I look up to in what context? In the context of winning elections or in the context of governance? If it's the context of winning elections, I would look up to the president, Asuwaju Ahmed Bola Tinubu. He has an excellent track record in winning elections. But is it the same in terms of governance? What matters to me is the reality that I face every single day. And the reality still boils down to a system.
Yeah. Okay, so at least you mentioned our president. Okay, you're smiling.
Yeah, I'm smiling.
Is it the same person?
Oh, no. Not necessarily. I guess his context.
Yeah,
actually
of course.
Put it in that way. The president actually is a very brilliant politician.
Okay.
So, but the person I would speak to, I think since we are putting it in the context of today, Nigeria as today, I think I would speak to a young man. He ran for office, he didn't win, but he's been contributing in his own way. Mr. Kunle Lawal. So he's the executive director of the Electoral College. So I did a course there. In 2020 lockdown, I was bored. I went to a very short course, particular about it. So what I went to learn was that Mr. Kunle Lawal is very particular about voter education, citizen education, citizen engagement. So what he does is he's able to break down systems of governance. He's able to be pragmatic. He's very realistic. So I think as much as I've had my own personal opinion about local government systems, I think when I went through the course, I was not able to understand in depth about how local government systems are the key foundations to Nigeria. I think even the examples you gave about Nigeria when we were doing in the 40s back then, most of the examples are governments that were broken down through regions, broken down, scaled down to the barest minimum, and they were succeeding. So in the context of the current system that we have now, the local government system has been underutilized, has been ignored. So during one of the courses we had, in fact, people my age, and what he does is he's deliberately attempting to educate my generation.
You're still watching the Political Advantage platform. Do stay with us.
Democracy, a word we say every June 12th. But what does it really mean to the everyday Nigerian? From annual hopes to hard-won recognition, Democracy Day stands as a symbol of struggle, power, and the right to choose. But what do the people think? Let's find out.
As we all know, it's a public holiday and doesn't have any impact on me.
I just see it as a public holiday, but at the same time, it's a day we honor the sacrifice of Abiola. The big step he took in Nigeria is something.
It's normally used to be May 29, but they say it's not June 12 because of the nullification of the Abiola election.
It doesn't mean nothing for me because I've never seen anything in democracy. There's no any impact that democracy had done to me. No any impact.
To me, actually, it's just a normal day. Though the government said it's a democracy day, but actually to me, it's just a normal day.
Well, I don't think my voice counts because it's a process of politicians.
Yeah, sometimes it counts because I do voice out my opinion sometimes. But in an electoral process, it doesn't count because those in power actually take control of electoral processes in Nigeria.
There are lots of corruption in the government. So it just determines what they do at the top side.
No, in the sense that whatever you say, be it on social media, be it on radio, television, it can be aired, but at the same time, those at the helm of affairs wouldn't bother to take it in view if it comes opposite to their opinion and to whatever they think they want to achieve. So honestly speaking, I would say no.
If I could change one thing in Nigeria, I would change the transportation system. Because of that, things are quite expensive. I would suggest they should make train system for transporting goods from state to state, at least.
If I'm to change anything in Nigeria, it's corruption. The system, it works with corruption. As of now, if you want to look for work, for a job opportunity, if you don't pay or bribe, we are not going to have that work.
If I could influence governance in Nigeria, is to change the way the budget is being made yearly. You see, year in, year out, same ministry are buying same items on yearly basis.
I will backdate that law of making our traditional rulers to become how they were before.
First of all, I would like to change education standard in Nigeria because we don't have any education standard in Nigeria.
Like, most of us don't believe it actually counts. Example, me. But at the same time, I believe one day it's going to count. One day we'll do the right thing. So I say I have hope in Nigeria.
It's not every vote in Nigeria that counts, so it should not be compulsory.
I don't see anything voting compulsory in Nigeria. You see, people will come, try to vote for their own candidate, they will not get result. But only a person to vote, no need.
I don't agree with making vote compulsory. After you make the vote, it's not what you vote that will be the result.
I would support if they could have made it to be something that make people see the reason why they should come out and vote.
Democracy isn't just about elections. It is about everyday dignity, access, and voice. From the streets to the voting booth, power is still in the people.
All right, you're welcome to the Political Advantage platform, also known as the PAP Show. We were discussing, because June 12th is actually Democracy Day in Nigeria. So from all that we have discussed, we're going to move to the next segment, talking about youth voices in democracy. So we're going to start with Elizabeth. Young people often, feel disconnected from governance. And, we have many young Nigerians that feel their votes aren't leading to change. They just go there, they vote, and then there is nothing that changes. So how can they go beyond just, voting to actually influencing the decisions that affect their lives?
Thank you very much for that question. And I'm glad that we've touched on the fact that democracy is not just about elections. Mm-hmm. Elections are important, but democracy is beyond that. Yeah. It now goes into the area of governance and the day-to-day and the decision-making that happens there. What I would say to young people, and I will speak to the experience of what we're seeing on initiatives like the Nigeria Youth Future Fund, is, first of all, don't wait for permission. You don't require permission to get involved in governance, in advocating for social change. Mm. Another point I will make is a lot of the people who get involved in election violence are young people. Mm-hmm. It's not the older population. Yeah. I will speak to elections again. The last elections that we had, only about 40% of registered voters were aged between 18 and 35. Yet, that we've just established that only 30% of us are aged 40 and over. What that tells us is that in terms of registering to vote, and I say this in the context of being able to start the process online. You could register, last time we could register online. So we're talking of registration, right? Yeah. And then when we look at the turnout at the voting polls, only about a third of those who register to vote usually show up at the voting polls. So young people, we need to also ask ourselves really and truthfully, what are we vocal when we need to be? Yeah. And then where are our voices most heard? And then when are we missing? Are we not showing up when we should be present? So that's another point. The first one I've made is about not asking. We don't need permission. Yeah. And then we need to examine our own role.
How do we disconnect the role played by money in deciding political power?
We can't.
We can't.
We cannot. It's not possible. The truth of it is, money answers all things. Answers all things. And in fact, if we're even thinking about the barriers and challenges that young people have in terms of getting involved, finance is a major part of it. The way, and then, speaking again to that question of how the system is set up, because there are democracies that are set up so that money isn't as important a factor in campaigns, elections. But for us here in Nigeria, money is a major factor. The bulk of power and resources still sit with an older generation who continue to dominate the party structures, continue to have a major say in who has opportunities and doesn't have opportunities. So no, we can't take away the role of money in.
Mukhtar, you are an economist. Do you agree with that? We can't take away the role of money?
No, that's the problem, because capital is the problem. Now, this is why I keep going back to the system, right? She mentioned a few things that I completely agree with. That's the whole push, the NSAS, the not too young to run. You're not too young to run. Oh, yeah, come and run now. Come and run. Look, the system is the problem. But now let me actually dissect the system, okay? Because it's really important that I dissect the system and tell you why systems, and I'll give examples. Now, the first example that I would give, because when I start talking about democracy being a failed system, people give me examples with Western institutions or Western countries. Oh, they're working. But they're not working. Now, they were working, but they stopped working since they adopted this new system. Because even for the West, the system is new. Liberal democracy is new, even for the Western societies. People have to understand, because certain things affect us, and we have to understand what affects us. Now, what happened? IMF told them to remove fuel subsidy, and guess what? They removed fuel subsidy, and all Nigerians are feeling it. Every country that has achieved development by subsidizing energy and infrastructure. You cannot take these things out of, this is public good, okay? So what happened was in the 70s, they came up with the structural adjustment programs, and I'll tell you why they came up with the structural adjustment. What are the structural adjustment programs? They now went all over the world forcing everybody to privatize your assets. National assets were privatized. National assets. All of a sudden, if you give me Obaja now, I'll be the richest black man in the world, believe me. Because that is a national asset that was handed over to an individual. Now look at Sokoto Cement, was handed over to an individual. Okay, now this is the system. If you look at countries like England, they've privatized everything, including waterways, including water. They've privatized it.
So are you basically trying to say that we cannot disconnect the role played by money in political power?
We cannot, because money at the end of the day, capital rules in every single thing that we do. Look, when I was young, people used to ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? People had at least professional ambitions. We don't anymore, because everybody just wants to get rich. If you have money, go to any court, you win any case. Money has taken over the system of the societal structure. And now what I keep saying is we must come up with a system that puts checks and balances. Because the current system is not working. The Americans came up with the American system that worked for them at that time. They were against free trade. They were against globalization. But when they achieved a certain level of development, then they wanted it.
Okay. Now, Akan, let's come back to you. You're talking about, empowering young leaders. You're part of a program that's specifically, doing that. So the Imaginative Futures Working Group, that's the NYFF. So what's your experience, been like? And how does this program prepare young leaders like yourself to change the Nigeria narrative in the future? Like, just in a nutshell.
So we came up with the documents with the Nigeria you want. So the Nigeria we want, we believe we want, is a Nigeria that has functional institutions. It's a Nigeria that that gives a platform for young people to be able to exploit their talents, exploit in a positive way, It's a place in Nigeria that encourages young people, because again, young people are like the largest demographic in the country. So it's a Nigeria that encourages young people to be part of not just politics per se. Again, that's where I'm going to deviate. And the young Nigerians be part of the system. I always try to tell people, especially when conversations about youths in politics or youths in governance comes up, I'm always more particular that the conversation goes to governance and not politics, because we have sort of created an ecosystem around politics. Politics in my state is a multi-million naira industry. there are people that are waiting for 2016 to come to make the money they've not made in the last 3 years and to sustain them for the next 3 years until another cycle comes. So if there's a way for young people to participate in governance, not necessarily politics itself, understand systems. I always encourage them, join the system, governance structure, governance system. Understand the system first of all before you join, so that you will not go and make the same mistakes. Understand the flaws, understand the actual system itself, so that you know the flaws, you know how not to do what people are doing. Then basically that's just it. I keep on going out.
I just want to add to what he just said.
Okay.
There is nothing for you to understand in a flawed system. Look. Let's call a spade. There is a fundamental problem here. We must sit and come up with solutions. Look, we have a lot of brilliant people in this country. I heard the former head of Nigerian Bar Association talking about a new system. He's right. We have a lot of brilliant people in this country. We have people that are still alive, people like Professor Ladipo that we can go back to and ask, look, what's really the issue here? We have a lot of brilliant people that we can assemble and be like, look, let's come up with a system that would really work. What's the big deal in coming up with a system? What's the issue?
That will take me to the next question, even though it's somewhat, the same. Talking about demographic dividend, which we know in layman's language is having more breadwinners than dependents in the country. But poor economic planning by successive governments directly impacted young people's ability to start business, to find jobs, and stuff like that. What economic policies would you prioritize to create real opportunities for the youth now?
No, thank you. Now, look at the current economic system that we practice is known as trickle-down economics. Money comes from government, whether we like it or not, right? And when money comes from government, it does not reach you. It goes through the private banks because the private banks have the ability to expand money, to create money by issuing out credit, right? The entire economic policy of this neoliberal system is based on managing inflation. Raise interest rates, bring down interest rates. Look, Manufacturers Association of Nigeria were complaining, we need to bring down interest rates. But guess what? The central bank is in a position called Zugzwan. It's a catch-22 situation. If you drop the interest rates, then the foreign capital that came in to balance your naira would run away. So interest rates have to stay high. What I'm saying is the entire system, it's a joke. Development, economic development. Look, there is no such thing as economics, politics, social. It's human life, human interaction. When I wake up in the morning and I'm going to buy bread, that is an economic action. But on my way to buy bread, I would talk to my neighbor about the safety of the community. That's a social action. These things don't exist in isolation. Just yesterday, people were complaining that the prices of RAM. Why? Because human action, that is a religious action, has now tweaked the price of RAM. So what I'm saying in essence is economics does not work in isolation. And our economic and social realities should determine the form of economic policies that we put out there. But you know why we can't just do that? Because Nigeria does not exist in isolation. This is what I keep saying. So first of all, for us to achieve economic development, we need to be able to produce productivity in whatever form it is. But this current system, you're still telling my daughter to draw cockroach in WAEC. How? No, how do you produce economic development from this? How? Secondly, the entire system. I know why I keep telling you that we need to look at the whole system. Okay, let's talk about classical economics. Land, labor, capital are the factors of production. Now, where do you put labor? When you have AI and machines doing everything. So it's not just, AI and machines doing everything. Look at the factors that would be affected. The whole idea of demand, because we're talking about wages. If you take away wages from people because machines are doing everything, how do you create demand for the goods that you've produced? So it's a lot more complicated than people just sitting here. She spoke about Peter Obi. I've listened to Peter Obi a few times. He said he's going to industrialize Nigeria, and I disagree. How? You cannot industrialize Nigeria in 8 years because you have 4 years to run for an election. After these 4 years, you're thinking of running for another election. There is no stability. And for you to industrialize a nation, you need to create an educational base. That is one. And then secondly, you need to create economic policies. You need to create industrial policies. And you need to create defense policies.
Wow. And I have to just stop you there, because of time. Like so many things to say, but so little time. Let's talk about, reimagining Nigeria, because we're all talking and then we have to be visionary. So the theme of our discussion is, shaping the Nigeria we want. That is the theme. So Elizabeth, if you could redesign Nigerian democracy to truly serve young people, in a nutshell,
it would be one where we leverage properly on technology. I personally, and me speaking personally, have a particular pain point around how we do the whole process of voters registration. and just the logistics of how we run our elections, right? Those are things that, you know, in 2025 shouldn't be an issue. The Nigeria I want to see, apart from being one that leverages on technology, is one where, in terms of those who occupy office, we see something that reflects, that's truly inclusive, where the best minds, and the truth of it is, if you have a more youthful population, you should expect to see more young people in being elected into offices, holding ministerial or, you know, executive positions.
All right, Akan, let me come back to you. Like, you know, despite over 2 decades of like democracy, electoral malpractice, and voter intimidation, they still remain, you know, prevalent despite, you know, all the decades of democracy that we've had before. So what concrete steps should be taken, like, you know, to strengthen electoral integrity and protect voters? What do you think?
It boils down to the system. I do not necessarily think electoral violence is going to end in Nigeria anytime soon, because we've gone back. Electoral violence has always existed in Nigeria. So it's not something that I believe would end within the next 10, 20 years. Maybe my generation might probably realize that it's not worth it, but you are hoping. You don't believe. I don't believe it's going to happen. So in what way do I expect? Basically, there has to be some form of reform that enables. I'm trying to pick the perfect word, so I necessarily don't get disquoted.
Okay.
So there has to be some sort of reform that has checks and balances. So I would use a very quick, the most basic one I know is the fact that there's a very unnecessary link between elections itself, electoral litigations, and actual swearing-ins, things like that. So I believe that if something as simple as that, if there are reforms that are put in place that shortens that time span, it's easier for you to know that, okay, I would use a personal example. I will not name names, but I know somebody who believed, and it worked for him actually, that however he won the election, he had 4 years to go to court. By the time the courts decide, he's done with the mandate. So what are you really giving the other person? So once you check that, it leads to more. Exactly. So that's just how I believe.
All right. So let's go back to Mukhtar. From a strategic standpoint, what democratic innovations like could Nigeria adopt that would make our system more responsive to citizens, especially young ones?
All right. Okay. So thank you. Now let's talk about, he mentioned reform and she mentioned the engagement of youth and women, and I will speak on both. Right? So engagement of youth and women. We had a governor who is a youth, but that decided to put $700,000, which is over ₦1 billion, just to pay the tuition fees in an American school of his kids. Now that is youthful involvement. Now let's talk about reforms. Now there are reforms and there are revolutions, right? I don't necessarily mean a violent revolution. Let me give you a simple example, the American Civil War. Now, what I think would happen, first of all, this whole system of governance, so legislative arm of governance, the judiciary and the executive, we should scrap it, let it go. Why? Because at the end of the day, you have two arms held by politicians, the legislative and the executive, right? But the judiciary, that's a professional discipline, right? So what we need right now is we need a system that will create checks and balances. Look, we are having issues of insecurity, right? Instead of having legislative, executive, and judiciary, whatever, let us have a system that really creates 3 different channels. Now, on the left channel, you have the bureaucracy, the civil servants. There should be no interference, because what we are having right now is politics has entered everywhere. And we're wondering why banditry is everywhere, herdsmen and farmers are fighting. There's just chaos everywhere. You know why? Because we have some of, believe me, Nigeria's security structure or security personnel are some of the best you can come across. But the system has boxed them into a corner that they can't do much. Why? Because of so much interference. You'd have somebody that his classmates are CSPs, he's a DC, and guess what? Because he has a political network, right? Postings and promotions, you have to pay for it. So what we need to do is let's separate, instead of having this executive, this legislative, this judicial, let us have a defense and security structure that is independent on its own, that is outside the interference of politics. right? And then let us have the bureaucratic, the civil servants that are independent on their own. And then in the middle, we have the professionals. Now, what do I mean by professionals? Everybody that wants to contest. Now, we need to have bodies. Okay, we have different forms of unions. We have teachers, we have medical personnel unions. We have all sorts. We have Pengusin, we have all sorts, right? Now, these are the people. If you want to contest, you should just be represented by any of these unions. So now interest moves from tribal and ethno-religious interest to group interest, right? And then now you can run for president as long as you're under this structure. And then this structure, the defense and security structure, is checkmating the political structure. The political structure is checkmating the bureaucratic structure. The bureaucratic structure is checkmating the... We just need a system that would checkmate. We are just adopting things that don't work. I'm not saying this system should be adopted. All I'm saying is there are so many things that we can do. We need to sit on a table and talk. We're not even talking. Biafra has not healed. People are not talking. People need to sit on a table and talk. Let's talk about the things that we don't want to talk about. Because everybody is running away. Oh, we'll come up with this solution. So we've been coming up with solutions. We've been having theoretical arguments since time immemorial, and we will continue to have these political arguments until their kingdom comes.
Okay, so now we've been talking about vision. It's time to talk about practical ways to change, but that will come up after the break. Do stay with us.
Take a seat on the Political Advantage platform for real conversations about Nigeria by Nigerians. Follow our live stream across these channels and learn how it all affects you. Every Sunday, you have a chance to stay ahead by staying engaged and informed. Tune in to the Political Advantage platform to share in real conversations that matter to you.
You're still watching the PAP show, and welcome back. We're talking about the Democracy Day in Nigeria. Today is June 12th. We've talked about vision and, all sorts of things that will lead us to have a better Nigeria. Now it's time for us to get practical. And I'm going to start with Akan. Talking about a vision that we have for a young person now watching this show and feels inspired but doesn't know where to start from. What advice would you give that person, from how he can balance activism to, taking practical steps to, making progress?
Okay, so I'll try to break it down into some factors. So if you're trying to transit from activism to actionable action, I would encourage you to just join a political party. Just join a political party. Then get involved. I don't necessarily believe, my personal opinion is that most political parties in Nigeria, all political parties in Nigeria are just very close to power. Okay. So there are no ideologies, but join a party of your preference. Then get involved in the processes.
Aspiring leaders, I hope you just got inspired and you're going to take that action. So now let's move back to Mukhtar. What role can young professionals, entrepreneurs, and business leaders play in strengthening our democracy?
Creative destruction.
Okay.
So look, there are just this system. Now there is a crisis of liberal democracy. And that crisis is liberal democracy. We need, first of all, look, there are three options that Nigeria has right now, whether Nigeria takes it or not. The first option is controlled demolition of the existing system by those in power. Controlled demolition. Because the system that we're practicing is archaic. The world has moved beyond that. It's a system that was established for extraction. We've moved beyond that. So the people in government should call people, put together a conference where people discuss and where people come up with a system, even if it means suspending the election. Is that not what they're after? They just want to stay in power, no problem. Would let you stay in power for a certain number of years, but the entire system, the entire system should be overhauled under your watch, but not under your control, because it has to be an independent system that would be created. Now, the second option is creative destruction by the professional class, the doctors, the students, every other individual, like the professional class, creative destruction. Now, NSAS was an attempt to push for a reform, even though it was hijacked and then it became something else. But what it showed us is the professional class, the youth, which is what they're talking about, can come together and push for this change. If the people in power do not agree to go towards the channel of controlled demolition, then we need to go towards creative destruction. Yeah. If we don't get creative destruction, we are going to get anarchy, because what is unsustainable cannot be sustained. Thank you very much.
Okay, well said, Mukhtar. Now let's go back to Elizabeth. Your PhD research examined how media framed female political leadership in Nigeria's 2023 election, yeah? Okay, so how does media representation, both traditional and social media, shape young people's perception of political leadership and democratic participation?
Okay, really great question. What I will say is, first of all, the media is a very important institution. Without us thinking too much about it, what it does is it presents to us pictures of the world, usually framed, in particular perspectives. So it also tells us what's important and what we should pay attention to, how we should think about things, amongst other things. So when we talk about how it shapes young people's perspective, so I will not pretend to speak for young people themselves as a group, but what I can tell you is that there's research and there's plenty of evidence that does show how young people themselves are represented. So if you look at Nigeria's media in particular, it's nuanced. So that's the good news about it. It's not all bad. Our young people are not presented as, disruptive people going and tearing and burning stuff down. No. For the most part, the representation of our young people shows that they are agitators for social change, right? So they'll do the protests. We don't like it. It makes us all uncomfortable. But the truth of it is that they are using their energy to push for a better Nigeria. That's the representation you find. What's happening on social media is that you have young people, and what the technology allows them to do is to be able to take their concerns, unlike before where they were gatekeepers that would censor, filter what goes out. Now you have young people at liberty, they call it citizen journalism. You are able to go out there, express, and even create movements, right? We've seen that happen often. So again, it's a mixed bag where young people, the representation of young people in media, plays out in these ways. The good thing, again, about social media is that where on TV, you may not be able to compete with the elders and the establishment for airtime. On technology means that, in fact, you talk of digital natives, that's their space to play. They know the technology, they know how to use it and how to use it effectively. So, let's see what it means for politics in Nigeria going forward.
Okay, now talking about today as, a special Democracy Day conversation, we're about to wrap it up, but we're not going to let you go without hearing a call to action from each and every one of you. Your final thoughts on call to action. So I will start with Mukhtar. Okay, maybe we should start with our country as the youth. Okay, what is your final thought and call to action, but in like a sentence or two?
I'll just basically put it in a sentence. As a young person, I would love to see Nigeria as a country that has strong institutions.
Okay.
That's basically it, because stronger institutions lead to the development of every other sector.
Wow, that's really a sentence. Okay, now Elizabeth, your final thoughts on call to action?
Okay. What I will say to our young people is, while one person cannot change the system alone, you can't have change in the system if, as individuals, we're not ready to take personal responsibility and do our own part.
Let's go back to Mukhtar.
Well, I strongly believe that the solutions to our problems are in minds that we're not listening to. There are so many great minds out there that do not have the opportunity to come out with their ideas, the solutions to these problems that we currently have. Let's kickstart the discussion. People should really start talking about these things. The system has failed. The system never worked. Right from inception, it never worked. When would it work? When I'm dead? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm the one that will actually say thank you. Talking about June 12, 1993, which was not just about one election, it was about the enduring belief that Nigerians deserve a government that serves them. Today, that belief lives on in the voices we have heard, in the energy of our young people, and in the collective determination to shape the Nigeria that we want. The democracy we celebrate today was paid for with sacrifice. Yes, it was. The democracy we will leave to the next generation depends. It actually depends on the choices that we make right here, right now. Thank you to our panelists, our co-sponsors, the Nigeria Youth Futures Fund, NYYF, and thank you for joining us on this Democracy Day edition of The PAP Show. The conversation does not end here. It continues with each of you. Good evening, Nigeria. I am Khadija Ahmad Rufai for The PAP Show.